right? It takes that long to make social change, but the data helped us do it, right? And it helped us figure out whether those messages were working, and it helped us figure out how to target those messages, and where we needed to increase law enforcement presence to do high visibility enforcement, and all those other kinds of things that helped us actually stamp out that stuff as much as we have. We're not done. But because we were able to use that data, and because we were able to think about how to bring a whole of government approach to it, and how we were able to message around it, we've been more successful than we ever have before. So I get to go on and on and on. And I think they're giving me until 2 to keynote you. But I can talk a little bit about how open data also helps us get some things done. And my favorite story in my time in transportation was when the Secretary of Transportation in the last administration, Anthony Fox, asked me, how come Google knows where all the transit is and I don't? It's a good question. It did not have a good answer. And it turns out that where Google and Apple and all these folks are getting this stuff is from open data from the transit agencies. And it's built in a format that was developed in collaboration between Portland's TriMet agency and Google. It's called now Feed Specification. It's dead simple to create. If you imagine what transit is, it's a series of points, stops, connected by lines, routes, that come and they are serviced on a schedule, times, right? That's it. That's all you need to describe the transit system. Now, it turns out in space and time that the transit system grows and shrinks and has more and less capacity, so it's like really interesting dynamics to understand how this thing works. So that's all you need to do to be able to feed Google your transit agency stuff and start to get directions. You can add more to it. You can like snap the routes to roads and add these curves and shapes and that kind of stuff, and that's all well and good. But you don't need to. All you need is a CSV file of stops, how stops are connected, and when buses or trains stop. That's kind of awesome. I could probably live on your open data portal. There are no transit agencies represented here today. Anyway, so what Google had was a screen, or Apple, or any one of these other mapping companies had was a screen that people couldn't get away from. So people were incentivized in the transit community to start sharing their data. It turns out that the Department of Transportation never asked if we could go grab that data from the transit agencies. That's why we didn't know where all the transit was. Oops. So I figure out how do we ask? And you know, in the federal government, right, we have the Paperwork Reduction Act. I'm here to tell you that observing open data in a portal is not an information collection. It's like somebody showing up at this meeting with a name tag on it. You see it, it's public. It's not an information collection. And having somebody certify that it's okay for you to grab it, because transit agencies started licensing their data. My problem wasn't that it didn't exist publicly. It's that they would license or put terms and conditions on it. Some transit agencies would say, you cannot make a derivative product using our data. Well, if I wanted to compile all the transit agencies' data into a national map, that would be a derivative product. So we had to get them to waive all these terms. So then, agreeing to waiving the terms is not an information collection. Right? I can tell you every lawyer I talk to on this, it's fun. But then it was like, okay, so now, we know that we can find and grab this information, and we know we need the transit agencies to waive a couple of things that they might have put on this data. Please do not put terms like no derivative products on your open data. It's not open if you do that. Our question was, okay, so which agency should collect this? Because now we have to go look in statute. So my Federal Transit Administration, you would think that they would have the authority. Their job is to understand how much transit moves, how much it costs, how many people it serves, but not where it is. And their authority to collect just it omits the concept of where or when. And so, but they can talk to all the transit agencies, so they can ask for the little waiver. Okay, so where else in the agency can we get this? Can we get the authority to collect? The Bureau of Transportation Statistics has authority to collect information on the extent of the transportation system. Hooray! Extent can be space and time. So now I gotta get these folks in a room and we can sort through all the legal questions, and then the question was, okay, that's a lot of data. Can we handle it? And people were concerned that there was gonna be too much data, so we actually focused on the DC region. And we said, how quickly can we make a prototype where we could grab all the data from all the transit agencies in the DC region, from Montgomery County and PG County, and from DC, and from WMATA, and from where I live in Alexandria, the DASH system. Arlington County's got their own thing. Fairfax has their own thing. Each transit agency is publishing its own schedules. This is super easy to get all the stuff pulled together. We built a prototype in a week. All right, cool. So we've solved all the legal problems. We've figured out who has the authority to collect it. We have shown that we can do it without hiring a massive pile of contractors and using existing technology. So, America, we should be able to do this, right? How do we ask for it? I know, let's have the secretary send a letter to the head of every transit agency in the country. And now we're in a policy. So, now we have to convince a bunch of people that it's okay for us to send this letter. But we did. And for a little while, I won't go into that. You can ask me that later over here. So we got the letter out, and 3 months later, we were able to create a map that showed 50% of scheduled service in the country. And it grows every day. And now we know where all the transit is. We know where all the transit was. And now we have a longitudinal data set that we can start to line up against the American Community Survey or other socio-demographic information and understand the relationship between transit and economic development. And it's a piece of open data that links with other open data that might be interesting to your local agencies, right? Because your transit agency probably isn't archiving their schedules. Like if you want the old schedules, you probably have to go into some archive room or visit the transit nerd that lives in the community who's kept every schedule, right, in their basement, right? And you'll have to digitize that. And that's cool. Like I love transit nerds, they're fun, right? But if you want to actually study this stuff over time, like a great federal role is to preserve good longitudinal data so that we can do it. So that's how we solve it, right? We can start to prove that $10 billion that we pass out every year to every transit agency in the country and look at its finances from fare box collections and local, state and local support and federal support and understand whether that subsidy is delivering results. And we won't have to start over or make small studies. We'll actually have good, solid data that's ready and able to be used for these kinds of analyses. I'm thrilled that all it took was us just to be able to ask, right? Yeah, there's plenty of politics in that stuff, but like that's the power of being able to share data across levels of government, right? Because now we can start to ask new and interesting questions and formulate new policy initiatives or experiments to figure out how we can better allocate our resources or work together across those levels of government, right? And if you view the federal agencies in their role of stewarding that sort of longitudinal product while the state and locals are in the business of serving their communities on a day-to-day basis, like that's a place where we can collaborate together on data sets that are super important to us, right? It's how we get the census. It's how we get the census of fatal crashes. It's how we get the list of railroad accidents and incidents. It's how we get all of our unemployment numbers, right? All of that stuff is coming through a collaboration amongst the layers of government. We have a new tool in our toolbox. And there's probably more that we can create if we can work together. So I have babbled for the better part of 25 minutes. But I'm also happy to take questions. Go ahead.
For the 50% that you don't have, why? What are the challenges around that?
Some of those transit agencies just aren't publishing that data.
Okay.
So like, it's very easy to get to 50%, I'll be honest, because if I get New York, I get like 20%. I might be cheating with my number. Really Google Maps to help people get rural Oregon. And yet, that's trying to move first. They also have rural agencies. There's just a really long tail of small agencies that need help. And so what we've actually been working on with there's the American Public Transportation Association, APTA, and then there's also a bunch of rural transit associations. So we've been trying to do some technical assistance programs to help them get that stuff moving and describe their systems and get them onto the open data train. Some of them don't even have websites, right? I'll be honest. So there's no place to go pick up the data. And that's where like regionalism comes into play. So you got a rural transit association, they can pool their resources, or they can rely on a state or a county agency to publish their data. That happens in a couple of like rural Maryland counties here in the region. Rural Maryland counties here in the region. So that's it's sort of it's really just a long tail of CPA.
Are there any transit that just don't want to give you their data, like they have it and it's open?
Yeah, actually nobody has said no, which is awesome, right? But their incentive is their transit system shows up in Google directions, right? Like, it's not for me. I'm just a steward, right? Like, they know the value proposition, which is to help their citizens. We're just able to do something more with it and steward it more effectively at the federal level. So it's never really about the feds asking, and I'll never start the conversation that way. If you want to serve your citizens by getting on their screen, then you do this, and we get benefit from it. Okay.
First, I apologize, I'm not sure what the transportation type is only automobile type of transportation or...
Oh, we get railroads, pipelines.
Great.
We do, like the Coast Guard does a lot of the maritime stuff, and the Army Corps does lots, the whole thing. But there's 30 federal agencies involved in maritime. And we also have the FAA. So if you can track a plane, that's our open data.
So have you been able, or have you worked on integrating your data with the data, kind of the obvious candidates would be Uber and Lyft and stuff like that, and also all the rest of the transportation systems? Like, I'm fascinated why in this country trains is so
Well, they're private, man. It's all private property.
Okay. I'm sharing my ignorance. But then,
It's okay.
and then last but not least, best practices from other parts of the world.
Mm.
What are you looking for?
So I'll try to remember them all, and you can correct me if I miss them. Have we focused on integrating our data? Yes. One of the challenges that we have with safety is we generally look at safety sort of one thing at a time. So we'll look at fatal crashes, and then we'll look at truck and bus crashes because we have an organization that monitors truck and bus safety. And then we'll look at pipeline incidents, but just interstate pipeline incidents. And then we'll look at railroad incidents and accidents. But we also have a stewardship responsibility for the railroad workforce. So when we get a railroad incident report that only involved a worker, we send that data over to OSHA so that they can go ahead and collect their data for that injury report. So the truth is, you don't experience as a human transportation safety one load at a time, right? Like, it's not like you got here today and you experienced a roadway safety issue and then a railroad safety issue and then a pipeline safety issue. Like, you live in a place and all these things converge. So one of the first things I did was actually bring all that safety data together. And boy, did I get called out for it. You can't do that. We collect different data. It doesn't mean the same thing. Right. And then when we put it all on a map, they were like, actually, this is kind of cool. So some of it is a little bit of that. We've also been pursuing trying to get the data to talk to one another. So when I talk about, overlaying crashes on roads and bridges and railroads and pipeline networks, and then integrating them into census blocks and those kinds of things to be able to do more of that multivariate analysis, We actually published a paper in a scholarly journal where we did this. It's on pedestrian fatality risk. So we came up with a risk model where we actually integrated our safety data as well as our roadway data and a bunch of census and labor data. And came up with a risk model that we can measure over time. And it got peer reviewed. So we're really excited about that. Trying to make this more of a habit is actually super hard. So I think what we've been showing is that the agency is wired to answer national questions. How many people died on our road as a country, right? We want to collect national statistics, but the intervention happens locally, partly because federalism, partly because that's where the action and the resources really are. People to make a context-sensitive treatment to a safety issue or an infrastructure issue or an innovation and those kinds of things. So what we have to spend some time working on is like what constitutes a powerful question that will draw the agency to understand how they can both do national statistics but make micro level models or meso level models that can help regions and states and locals get better answers to make better interventions. Uber and Lyft are only just starting to figure out how to share their data. They're super protective of it. I think the primary motivation for that is that they're afraid if they violate their promises to their customers, they won't get used. Right? So they just aren't assured that they can share effectively with government. And since China has my data for my personnel file 3 or 4 times, I can see why they would feel that way. So I think that there's an opportunity there for more public-private partnerships, like the Shared Streets platform that the bank has been doing, the World Bank, there's lots of banks. It is an opportunity there, but it's more of a trust-building exercise than it is a technical challenge. And so, I would also say, Uber and Lyft, they represent some people. They don't represent all people. And there's a lot of transportation folks who feel like the data is greener on the other side. Maybe it is. Right? There's bias in that data. There's bias in the Waze data that I collect. Right? Approaching that with a clear mindset about how you're going to control for that bias is absolutely key. But I do think that Waze and Lyft and those kinds of folks are just learning how to work with government. Partly because I think their business model initially was confrontational in order to be able to exist in state and local governments, so they obviously weren't interested in sharing, right? Because the whole business model was to go challenge city council and bring residents there to say you should allow these services to exist. So we're past that point, so maybe they're growing up. In terms of paying attention to what other folks are doing across the world, I really rely for the transportation community. The largest nerd event for transportation is here in DC. It's the Transportation Research Board annual meeting. And so if you ever want to go to that, it's the National Academies of Science and Engineering and Medicine have the Transportation Research Board, and about 10,000 transportation researchers from around the world descend upon the Marriott Marquis next to the convention center to nerd out about transportation for an entire week. It's in January, so you have plenty of time to plan your visit. And so that's the easiest way to stay connected. I had a call this morning with folks from the Inter-American Development Bank about how we could collaborate around how we're working with Waze data. So I do my best to stay connected, like on a one-on-one basis, and find that works best. Did I answer all of them? Yes. Yes, sir.
With respect to the transit data that you're collecting, so did you only collect the schedules, or did you do any collection of actual arrivals and departures, and some kind of comparison of on-time percentage in any region or at any level?
Not yet. Super sensitive. Also, the sensors for those things are kind of not really reliable. And so even a transit agency that's using automated vehicle location is what the technology is called, AVL. And don't forget about the automated passenger counter, or APC, which will tell us how many people are on the vehicle, maybe, because it has a hard time counting when the bus is crowded and everybody jumps off. The transit agencies are super scared of sharing that data, even with their constituents, let alone with the feds, because of its reliability issues. So they spend a lot of time with their consultants scrubbing that and trying to make it work better. So I think, remember I talked about trust. This is one of those places where I think that's one where a public-private partner that can help us do that would be probably preferable. Just because I think the transit agencies would be freaked out if I asked them for their AVO and their APC. You have to understand the market distortion of the federal government asking you for anything, right? So, like, it was a big deal to be like, hey, I heard you're publishing this. If you would just give us permission to use it, that would be super good. And whew. I also heard you have this data because we gave you federal money for it, and we'd like